The golden facade. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling estate, casting geometric patterns across the marble floors that Victoria had personally designed. She stood in her walk-in closet, running her fingers along the silk of an emerald dress that would complement the evening's color scheme perfectly. Tonight marked 10 years of marriage to Marcus Sterling, and their anniversary party would be the social event of the season. Victoria Sterling had built her reputation on creating architectural marvels that harmonized with nature, earning her the title of the Green Goddess in Architectural Digest. Her sustainable designs had revolutionized commercial construction across 3 states, and her firm, Sterling and Associates, was valued at over $50 million. She was living proof that a woman could have it all: a successful career, a beautiful home, and a marriage to one of the city's most eligible bachelors. Marcus Sterling was the golden boy of the tech world, his software company having gone public 5 years earlier in a spectacular IPO that made them both incredibly wealthy. His boyish charm and innovative mind had made him a darling of the business magazines, and together they were the power couple everyone envied. Their love story was the stuff of fairy tales, college sweethearts who had built empires side by side. As Victoria descended the grand staircase she had designed herself, she could see the catering staff bustling about, transforming their home into a wonderland of white roses and golden accents. The party planner, a frazzled woman named Beverly, rushed up to her with a clipboard clutched to her chest. "Mrs. Sterling, the ice sculpture's just arrived, and the string quartet is setting up in the garden pavilion. Everything is going according to plan," Beverly gushed, her cheeks flushed with excitement. Victoria smiled, but something felt off. She had always prided herself on her intuition, the same instinct that helped her envision buildings that seemed to grow naturally from their landscapes. Tonight, that intuition was sending up warning signals she couldn't quite identify. The first guests began arriving at 7, and Victoria played her part to perfection. She glided through the crowd in her emerald dress, accepting congratulations and compliments with gracious smiles. The great hall buzzed with conversations about business deals, upcoming elections, and vacation plans to European villas. These were her people: architects, developers, tech moguls, and their impeccably dressed wives. Marcus appeared at her. He sighed, devastatingly handsome in his custom tuxedo, and slipped his arm around her waist. "You look absolutely radiant, darling," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. But his eyes were scanning the crowd, searching for someone. "Looking for anyone in particular?" Victoria asked, keeping her voice light despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Just making sure all our VIP guests made it," he replied smoothly, but she caught the way his jaw tightened slightly. That's when Victoria saw her, a woman who moved like liquid silk through the crowd, her raven hair swept into an elegant chignon, her black dress clinging to curves that could stop traffic. Natasha Wilde, owner of the prestigious Wilde Contemporary Gallery, was known for discovering emerging artists and for her rumored affairs with powerful men. Victoria had met her briefly at a charity auction months ago and had found her charming, if a bit predatory. As the evening progressed, Victoria began to notice things: the way Marcus's phone buzzed constantly and how he would step away to check it. The way Natasha lingered near the bar, nursing the same glass of champagne, while her eyes followed Marcus's every movement. The way her husband's laugh seemed forced, his smile too bright, his attention scattered. During dinner, as guests filled the dining room she had designed with its soaring ceilings and living wall of cascading plants, Victoria excused herself to use the powder room. As she walked down the hallway, she heard Marcus's voice coming from his study, the door slightly ajar. I know. Just give me a few more weeks, and we can be together openly," he was saying, his voice low and urgent. "The party is just for show. You know you're the only one I really love." Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more. "The pregnancy changes everything," Marcus continued. "But I've already spoken to my lawyers. We can make this work, Natasha. Trust me." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Pregnancy. Natasha was pregnant with her husband's child. Her legs felt weak, and she had to grip the doorframe to steady herself. 10 years of marriage, 10 years of building a life together, and this was how it ended, with hushed phone calls and secret pregnancies. She heard footsteps approaching the study door and quickly composed herself, smoothing her dress and forcing her features into a mask of calm. When Marcus emerged, she was standing there with a bright smile. "There you are," she said sweetly. "Everyone's asking for the anniversary toast." Marcus's face went pale for just a moment before he recovered, flashing his megawatt smile. "Of course, wouldn't want to keep our guests waiting." As they walked back to the dining room together, Victoria's mind was racing. She thought of all the late nights he'd claimed were for work, all the business trips that seemed to coincide with art gallery openings, all the times he'd been distant and distracted. The signs had been there, but she had chosen to trust him, to believe in their perfect life. Now, as she prepared to face a room full of their friends and family, Victoria Sterling realized that her marriage had been nothing but a beautiful lie. But she was an architect. She knew how to tear down structures and build something stronger in their place. Tonight, the demolition would begin. The unraveling truth. 3 months earlier, Victoria had been going through their joint credit card statements when she noticed charges that made no sense. Expensive jewelry from Tiffany's that she had never received, dinners at romantic restaurants. She had never been to weekend stays at luxury hotels during Marcus's supposed business trips. Her architect's mind, trained to notice every detail and inconsistency, couldn't ignore the pattern. That's when she had contacted Detective James Morrison, a former police officer turned private investigator who specialized in infidelity cases. James was a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes and an unassuming manner that made people comfortable enough to reveal their secrets. He had presented Victoria with a manila folder filled with photographs that had shattered her world. Marcus and Natasha, holding hands in Central Park, kissing outside the gallery, entering a boutique hotel together. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sterling," James had said, his voice gentle but firm. "But there's more. Ms. Wilde is approximately 3 months pregnant. My sources at her doctor's office confirm the timing aligns with when their relationship began." Victoria had stared at the photographs until they blurred, feeling as though she was drowning in her own living room. But she hadn't cried. Instead, she had done what she always did when faced with a structural problem. She had called in an expert. Cordelia Blackwood was a divorce attorney with a reputation for being ruthless and brilliant in equal measure. She was a woman who had clawed her way to the top of a male-dominated profession and had no patience for sentiment when it came to protecting her clients' interests. When Victoria had called her that night 3 months ago, Cordelia had listened to the whole story without interruption. "The good news," Cordelia had said in her crisp British accent, "is that you're not some helpless housewife. You have your own assets, your own business. The bad news is that Marcus is smart enough to be covering his tracks. We need to be smarter." Now, as Victoria stood in the dining room watching Marcus charm their guests with his easy smile and quick wit, she knew that all their careful planning was about to pay off. The months of surveillance, of quietly moving assets, of building her case, had led to this moment. Marcus stood up, champagne glass in hand, and the room fell silent. "10 years ago," he began, his voice carrying easily across the room, "I married the most incredible woman I've ever known. Victoria Sterling isn't just my wife. She's my partner, my inspiration, and the love of my life." The crowd murmured appreciatively, and Victoria felt bile rise in her throat. She had heard variations of this speech at countless dinner parties. over the years, but tonight it felt like a mockery. But tonight, Marcus continued, his eyes finding Natasha in the crowd, I want to toast the most important woman in my life, the one who has given me everything I never knew I needed. Victoria's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. Marcus was about to publicly humiliate her by toasting his mistress at their anniversary party. The audacity of it, the sheer cruelty, took her breath away. But before Marcus could continue, Victoria stood up, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Actually, darling, she said, her voice carrying a dangerous sweetness, I have something to say first. She had planned to wait until later in the evening, but Marcus had forced her hand. She walked to where he stood, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. The room was so quiet she could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the foyer. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria began, taking the microphone from Marcus's stunned grasp. Thank you all for celebrating what has truly been an illuminating 10 years of marriage. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a sealed envelope. Marcus, since you're so fond of toasts, I have a little anniversary gift for you. She handed him the envelope, watching as confusion and then dawning horror crossed his features. Inside were copies of all the evidence James had gathered, the photographs, the financial records, the proof of his systematic betrayal. Go ahead, Victoria said into the microphone, her voice steady and strong. Open it. I think our guests would love to see what kind of man you really are. Part 3. The Perfect Storm. The silence that followed Victoria's revelation was deafening. 200 of the city's most influential people sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, their faces a mixture of shock, horror, and the kind of morbid fascination that comes with witnessing a spectacular downfall. Marcus's hands shook as he pulled out the photographs. The first image, him and Natasha in an intimate embrace outside her gallery, fluttered to the floor like a fallen leaf. The room erupted in gasps and whispers as guests craned their necks to see what had caused their host to turn ashen. 10 years, Victoria continued, her voice now carrying the full weight of her fury. 10 years I've stood by your side, building our life together while you built a second life behind my back. She turned to face Natasha, who was frozen near the back of the room like a deer caught in headlights. And congratulations on your pregnancy, Ms. Wilde. I do hope Marcus has promised you more than he promised me. Natasha had recovered from her initial shock and was now pushing through the crowd toward the exit, her black dress a slash of movement against the sea of frozen guests. But Victoria wasn't finished with her yet. Leaving so soon, Ms. Wilde, Victoria called out, but you haven't heard the best part yet. Natasha stopped, her back rigid, but she didn't turn around. The guests' heads swiveled between the two women, like spectators at a tennis match, sensing that the real show was just beginning. You see, Victoria continued, walking slowly around the dining table like a prosecutor addressing a jury. While my husband was busy playing house with his gallery owner, I've been doing some redecorating of my own. She gestured to Penelope, Ashford, her business partner and closest friend, who stood near the doorway with a satisfied smile playing on her lips. Penelope was a force of nature, a brilliant structural engineer who had helped Victoria build their architectural empire from the ground up. As of this morning, Victoria announced, her voice ringing clear and strong, I am the sole owner of Sterling and Associates. You see, Marcus, while you were busy transferring money to offshore accounts, yes, I know about those too, I was quietly buying out your shares in our company. The room erupted in whispers. Several business associates leaned forward, suddenly very interested in the financial implications of what they were witnessing. Marcus finally found his voice. Victoria, you can't, the prenup that you had your father's lawyers draw up? Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. The one that assumed I would always be the sweet, compliant wife who would never question your decisions. I had Cordelia Blackwood review every line of that document. Did you know that adultery voids most of its protective clauses? Cordelia stepped forward from where she had been watching near the kitchen entrance, her silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. She was a legend in family law, a woman who had never lost a high-profile divorce case. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cordelia said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded courtrooms for 30 years, "I present to you the future of sustainable architecture, Victoria Sterling, CEO." That's when the double doors to the dining room burst open, and Theodore Sterling strode in like an avenging angel. Marcus's father was a man who commanded attention simply by existing, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from 40 years of building and controlling a business empire. His face was thunderous as he took in the scene. "What in God's name is happening here?" Theodore's voice boomed across the room. Victoria turned to face her father-in-law, the man who had never quite approved of his son's choice in wives. "I'm serving my husband with divorce papers," Victoria said calmly, pulling a second envelope from her clutch. "At our anniversary party. I thought it was poetic." Theodore's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications. The Sterling family. Name was being dragged through the mud in front of the city's power brokers. "This is a private family matter," Theodore said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Private?" Victoria interrupted, her voice rising for the first time that evening. "There's nothing private about this, Theodore. Your son has been flaunting his affair for months. The only private thing here was my humiliation." With that, she set down the microphone and walked out of her own party, leaving behind a room full of stunned guests and the wreckage of what had once been considered the perfect marriage. The gilded cage, the Blackwood mansion, rose from the hillside like something from a dream or a nightmare, depending on your perspective. Violet pressed her face to the limousine window, watching manicured gardens and marble fountains blur past. 3 days had passed since she'd signed Marcus's contract. 3 days since her world had turned upside down. Her father was already receiving treatment at the city's most exclusive medical facility, and the relief in his eyes had made every signature worth it. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" The voice belonged to Helena Blackwood, Marcus's sister, who had appeared at Violet's elbow like an elegant spectre. Where Marcus was all sharp angles and contained intensity, Helena possessed a fluid grace that made Violet feel clumsy by comparison. Her silver hair was swept into a perfect chignon, and her designer dress probably cost more than Violet's entire wardrobe. "It's beautiful," Violet managed, stepping out of the car onto gravel that crunched like diamonds beneath her worn boots. Helena's laugh was musical, but not unkind. "Beautiful, yes, but beauty can be its own prison, dear. Come, let me show you to your quarters. We have much work to do if you're going to survive Marcus's world." The mansion's interior was a study in controlled elegance, soaring ceilings, priceless artwork, furniture that belonged in museums. Violet's reflection looked small and out of place in the polished marble floors. Helena led her up a grand staircase to a suite of rooms that was larger than Violet's entire apartment. "This will be your sanctuary," Helena said, throwing open French doors to reveal a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. "Marcus has the east wing, you have the west. Public spaces for public appearances, private spaces for sanity." "Helena, I need to ask you something." Violet turned from the window, gathering courage. "Why is your brother really doing this? The merger story feels incomplete." Helena's perfectly composed expression flickered for just a moment. "My dear brother has many secrets, most of them painful, but I will say this, Marcus has never brought a woman home before. Contract or not, you're the first person to breach his carefully constructed walls in years." That evening, Violet found herself standing in the marble foyer wearing a borrowed gown that cost more than her car. waiting for Marcus to escort her to the Westfield Foundation charity gala. When he appeared at the top of the stairs, her breath caught despite herself. In his tuxedo, he looked like every fantasy prince she'd ever imagined, dangerous and magnetic. "You look stunning," he said, offering his arm with formal courtesy. The gala was held in a ballroom that sparkled like the inside of a jewel box. Violet clung to Marcus's arm, overwhelmed by the wealth and power surrounding them. Conversations paused as they passed, curious eyes cataloguing her every feature. Whispered assessments following in their wake. "Marcus Blackwood as I live and breathe." The voice cut through the crowd like a blade. Violet turned to see a man approaching, tall, silver-haired, with eyes like winter frost. Everything about him suggested barely controlled hostility. "James," Marcus replied, his arm tightening protectively around Violet's waist. "I didn't expect to see you here." James Porter smiled, but it held no warmth. "I wouldn't miss celebrating your sudden marriage. Congratulations on finding someone willing to overlook your family's rather colorful history." His gaze fixed on Violet with predatory interest. "Tell me, Mrs. Blackwood, has your husband shared the story of why he really left London, why he can never go home again?" Violet felt Marcus go rigid beside her, saw something flash in his dark eyes, pain quickly buried beneath control. "That's enough, James, is it?" James stepped closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Some secrets have a way of surfacing, don't they? Especially when there's so much money involved." As James melted back into the crowd, Violet looked up at her husband's pale face. "Marcus? What was he talking about?" "Nothing that concerns you," Marcus said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Just old rivalries and older wounds." But as they danced later that evening, Violet couldn't shake the feeling that she'd married a man with shadows in his past, shadows that might reach out to destroy them both. In Marcus's arms, she felt the careful walls he'd built around himself, and for the first time since signing that contract, she wondered what other secrets her billionaire husband was hiding. Part 3. Cracks in the facade. 2 months into their arrangement, Violet had grown accustomed to the rhythm of their strange life. Mornings in her art studio, a converted conservatory that Marcus had surprised her with, complete with north-facing windows and professional lighting. Afternoons visiting her father, whose color had returned thanks to cutting-edge treatments. Evenings playing the devoted wife at various social functions, learning to navigate conversations about charity boards and investment portfolios. She was mixing paints when Helena burst into the studio, her usual composure cracked. "She's back," Helena announced without preamble. "Who's back?" Violet set down her palette, alarmed by the panic in Helena's voice. "Diana Westfield, Marcus's former fiancée. She's returned from Paris, and she's already making inquiries about your marriage." Helena began pacing, her heels clicking against the hardwood floors. "Diana doesn't give up easily on things she considers hers." Violet's stomach clenched. Marcus had never mentioned a previous engagement, though given their business arrangement, she supposed his romantic history wasn't her concern. Still, the omission stung more than it should have. What does she want? Marcus, obviously. She broke their engagement 2 years ago to pursue some French aristocrat, but apparently that didn't work out. Helena stopped pacing to fix Violet with an intense stare. "Diana comes from old money, the kind of woman Marcus's world expects him to marry, if she's determined to win him back." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of raised voices. From the main hall, Violet and Helena exchanged glances before hurrying toward the commotion. They found Marcus facing a woman who could have stepped from the pages of a fashion magazine, tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless elegance that money and breeding provided. "Darling, you can't seriously expect me to believe this charade is real," Diana was saying, her cultured voice carrying easily through the space. A marriage to some unknown artist? It's so unlike you. Diana. Marcus's voice was carefully controlled, but Violet could see tension in the set of his shoulders. You have no right to be here. Diana laughed, the sound like silver bells with an edge of steel. I have every right. We were engaged, Marcus. We have history. Her gaze shifted to Violet, taking in her paint-stained apron and casual clothes with obvious dismissal. Surely you don't expect me to believe you've fallen in love with this. Something hot and fierce ignited in Violet's chest. She stepped forward, surprising herself with her boldness. Actually, he has. The lie came easily, fueled by indignation. And I've fallen in love with him. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Diana's perfect composure cracked slightly, while Marcus went very still beside her. When Violet looked up at him, she found him staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. How quaint. Diana recovered, her smile sharp. Well, I suppose time will tell how long this little infatuation lasts. Marcus, when you tire of playing house, you know where to find me. After Diana's dramatic exit, the hall fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock. Helena cleared her throat awkwardly and disappeared, leaving Violet alone with Marcus. You didn't have to do that, Marcus said finally. Yes, I did. Violet crossed her arms, still burning with righteous anger. She was being cruel, and I won't stand for it. Marcus studied her face for a long moment, something shifting in his dark eyes. You defended me. Of course I did. We may have a contract marriage, but I'm still your wife. That means something to me, even if it doesn't to you. Without warning, Marcus stepped closer, his hand reaching up to cup her cheek. It means more to me than you know, he said quietly. For a heartbeat, Violet thought he might kiss her. The air between them crackled with tension, with possibilities that had nothing to do with contracts or business arrangements. Then Marcus's phone rang, shattering the moment. He stepped back, the wall between them rebuilding itself brick by brick. I have to take this, he said, already turning away. It's about the merger. As Violet watched him retreat to his office, she pressed her fingers to her cheek where his touch still lingered. Somewhere in the past 2 months, the lines had begun to blur. What had started as a business arrangement was becoming something else entirely, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. But Diana's return had reminded her of an uncomfortable truth. Marcus Blackwood belonged to a world where love was a luxury and marriage was strategy. No matter how real her growing feelings felt, she was still just playing a role. The question was whether Marcus was playing one too, or if the moments of tenderness she glimpsed were as genuine as they seemed.